Greetings from Brother Stephen. I'm a disciple and witness of Jesus Christ. To all the inhabitants of the earth, I present to you as a witness the gospel of the kingdom. In this lesson today, titled Satan's Craftiness, we're going to be going over Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 13. Now, if you have not watched these last two lessons, particularly the serpent story and Earth's age, a lot of the information that we go over in this study you probably will not understand. The Church of Jesus Christ YouTube channel is designed for you to start at the very first video and work your way up to the top. So if this is your first time tuning in, a lot of stuff in this video you probably simply will just not understand. But getting to the lesson, again, one of the first things I want you to remember as we get into Genesis chapter 3 is that this is 8 ages after creation. Each age is 2,000 years, so this is 16,000 years after creation. So Adam and Chava lived for 16,000 years before Satan deceived the woman. Like always, we're going to read Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 in the King James Version Oxford edition of 1769, which is a false translation. Then we'll get into updating that translation so people can understand exactly what it is saying. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God do know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. So jumping right into Genesis chapter 3 verses 1, and again, this is my translation and updated version, so when people of this modern day and age hear and read, they understand exactly what it is saying. So verse 1 will say, Now Nakash. And again, to understand who Nakash is, you have to go back to that last lesson. But Nakash is in reference to the constellation serpents. In Hebrew, this constellation is called Nakash. And this is why Satan is called Nakash in the book of Genesis, because this constellation represents him and his story in the heavens. Now Nakash was craftier. Now the reason we use the word craftier here, if you just look up crafty in a dictionary, and again I use a Google dictionary, it's clever. So Nakash was clever at achieving his aim by indirect or deceitful methods. And then as you can see, all of these synonyms could be used in the place of craftier, but we just use the word craftier because when you take the Hebrew word and translate it into English, it's more commonly associated with this word crafty. So again, now Nakash was craftier than any dinosaur of the field which Jehovah Elohim had made. And again, this word dinosaur just represents the sizes of all living nephish in the beginning when Elohim originally created um, animals. They were enormous. Now, one of the things I want to point out really quick, again, this is also like a quick review. When you go to Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22, it says, Jehovah possessed me in the beginning. And as you can see, this word beginning comes from the Hebrew reference number 7225. And if you look that word up in the concordance, it derives from this Hebrew word, and you will pronounce that Rasheth. So Jehovah possessed me in the Rasheth of his ways before his works of old. And again, this information that I'm going over in Proverbs, I'll go over in detail in a study titled Elohim, Not God. Now, this word Rasheth comes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when it says the plan was Rasheth. So Elohim in eighth created the heavens and the earth. And this plan Rasheth means that the plan was for the Son of God to be devoured and crucified on the cross. So this was God's plan before he ever created the heavens and the earth. And again, we go over this word Rasheth in detail in the study titled Not in the Beginning, but Beth Rasheth, or the plan was Rasheth. Now we back to verse 23, and from Proverbs chapter 8, it says, I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning. Now, as you can see, this word beginning comes from Hebrew reference number 7218. It does not come from this Hebrew reference number 7225. This is Rasheth. This is how Rasheth looks in Hebrew. This word beginning comes from the Hebrew word Rosh, and this is how it looks in Hebrew. So when you're reading Proverbs chapter 8 verses 22, this is talking about when Jehovah created Elohim. Now basically what I have here is just imagery to try to help you explain that. This is the Rosh. This is the planet that was created before the earth. The Rosh is before the Rasheth. This is like the father planet, and this is why Jesus Christ refers to Elohim as his father in the New Testament, and he referred to Israel as being his mother in the New Testament, because he comes from the creation of his own hand. He comes from this father planet to this mother planet. And this is where this planet here is where Satan comes from. Satan is not originally from Earth. He is from the Rosh. When you go to Psalms 115:3, it says, but Elohim is in heavens. And again, that is referring to this planet that Elohim is from. He have done whatsoever he hath pleased. When you go to Matthew chapter 6 verse 9, this is Jesus Christ saying, our Father. This Father is referring to Elohim, which is in heaven, referring to this Rosh. This most likely this is a planet in another galaxy that God created before he created this galaxy and this earth. And again, this is where the great dragon is from, Satan, Diablos. So when you go to Revelation chapter 12, verses 9, it says, "And the great red dragon was cast out, the old serpents or Nakash, called Diablos, the enemy, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So again, Satan was cast from this planet to this planet. Um, Satan and his angels are not from this earth. They're from a different planet. So now we're back at Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. And it says, "And he said unto the woman," this is Nakash, the serpent, "Yes, have Elohim said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden." Now, the reason I have this question mark bolded in red, because I want you to notice that when he first approaches the woman, he approaches the woman with a question. And now basically what I have here is just a Google definition of question to help you understand what's going on. When you look up question, the definition says a sentence worded or expressed so as to elicit information. And when you look at one of the first subsection, it says a doubt about the truth or validity of something. So here, Satan is not necessarily trying to elicit information, but he's trying to get Eve to doubt the truth of what Elohim has said. Now, this is one of Satan's most basic, simplest tactics. If you're ever talking to a person and they start off by asking you questions about your faith, beware, because not only are they eliciting information to try to see how smart you are, but they're going to try to get you to doubt what you believe. And actually, if you give me a second, I want to show you a very good example of that.
That Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, he said that he was God. I'll come to your question. Before I come to your question, let me tell you one thing. I've read the Bible. There is not a single unequivocal statement in the complete Bible where Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, himself says that I am God, or where he says worship me. If any Christian can point out to me a single unequivocal statement, a single unambiguous statement in the complete Bible where Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, himself says that I am God, or where he says worship me, I am ready to accept Christianity today.
Alright, now that's all I'm pretty much want to show you. You can go watch that video if you want to later. But that is a Muslim, and he does the same thing. He starts off with a question, asking people to show him where in the Bible Christ says, I am God, worship me. It is a trick to get you to doubt the truth about who Christ is. Now we're going to go over a few verses. Starting off with 1 Timothy chapter 1 verses 4. It says, "Neither pay attention to movies or stories and endless genealogies, which minister questions." Again, because these questions is to get you to doubt the truth, rather than godly edifying, which is a faith. So again, you don't pay attention to these false movies that they make about the Bible. Don't pay attention to these endless genealogies or things which minister questions. When you go to 1 Timothy 4 and 7, it says, "But ignore wicked, unbalanced stories." I believe the King James Version Bible say old wives, and that literally means just what is like an old woman. She's an old woman because she's unstable, kind of unbalanced. So, but ignore wicked, unbalanced stories and and exercise yourself rather unto godliness. And this just means doing what's right, loving people, and studying your Bible. 1 Timothy 6:3-5. If any man teach otherwise, and consent not to the wholesome words, even the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness, he is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions. This doting kind of refers to that same word, old wife fables, or unbalanced stories. He's not balanced. And he's but doting about questions and strifes of words, whereof come envy, strife, railing, and evil hypothesis. And basically, I have a definition here for you for hypothesis, so you can understand what the scriptures is talking about. And it is a subsumption or proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence as a starting point for further investigation. In other words, what they are saying, they have nothing to back it up. Limited evidence. And let's see, read this subheading here. A proposition made as a basis for reasoning without any assumption of its truth. And it just kind of means the same thing. They have an hypothesis, they want to start an argument, they have no foundation even to start the argument with. These are evil hypotheses, evil theses, evil assumptions. And we're still at 1 Timothy chapter 6. We're going into verse 5. It says, perverse conflicts of men of corrupt minds and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness, from such remove yourself. So anytime you're even in a conflict with somebody, or even these a lot of these preachers and pastors on TV, one of the main things they do when anytime they're preaching that gaining, and I'm talking about man-made materials, when they're trying to teach you that anything about gaining is godliness, the scriptures teach us remove yourself from these type of people. The Bible say godliness with contentment is great gain. And the scripture says having food to eat and clothes on your back, be content. If anybody trying to teach you that gain, making money, buying airplanes, buying expensive stuff, that these things are God's blessing you, the scriptures stating blatantly to remove yourself from these people. Some people try to say, oh, pay your 10% tithes and God's going to bless you 100-fold. That's supposing that gain is godliness. From such remove yourself. 2 Timothy 2:14 says, of these things put them in remembrance, charging them before the Lord that they argue not about words to no profit, but to the destruction of the hearers. In other words, these people, like the video we just watched, when they start off with these questions, they want to engage in an argument so other people can hear, and it destroys their faith. Even if it don't destroy your faith, they do it to try to destroy other people's faith. But don't fall for that trick. Verse 15 says, study to show yourself catted. Catted means study to show yourself. The King James Version Bible used approved unto God, but the correct translation is catted, and it means to show yourself a son or daughter unto Elohim. So if you call yourself a child of God, but you are not studying the scriptures for the truth, you're not catted. You're not a son or daughter of the Most High. You must study the scriptures. You must seek God with all of your heart. And that way, if you have a question about something as you read and study, the Bible says all scriptures are given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for correction, and reproof. It teaches you so that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. And those all good works is that godliness, not doing anything that will harm another person. So it said, a workman that need not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun wicked and vain arguments, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. Now I'm just going over these scriptures with you to try to help build a foundation in case this ever happens to you. Verse 18 says, who concerning the faith have erred, saying that the resurrection is past already, and overthrew the faith of some. I have verse 18 in here just to kind of give you an example of those of an hypothesis, claims that people make, and they have no evidence to back up their claim or their theses or their assumption. And with these questions and with these evil hypotheses, they overthrow some that was of faith. 2 Timothy 2:23, it says, but foolish and unlearned questions avoid. Don't even answer them, knowing that they do gender strife. And again, this is what Satan was doing in the beginning. This is one of Satan's most basic tactics. Titus 3:9, but avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law. Don't argue with people about the laws in the Old Testament. It is foolish, for they are unprofitable and vain. A man that is an heretic after the first and second abomination reject. A heretic is somebody that rejects the blatant truth. If it's a blatant and obvious truth and they reject it, they are a heretic. It says, knowing that the heretic is converted and sin. And when it say such is converted, it means he's converted to a doctrine of hell. He has become a twofold child of Satan, and he sinned, and he is condemned of himself. So now we're back at verse 2 where it says, and the woman said unto Nakash, that is that serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Elohim hath said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. So again, Satan's first plan didn't necessarily work. We're going to verse 4. It says, and Nakash said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. Now, this goes back to Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, which we cover in the study titled Tree of Knowledge. It says, and Jehovah Elohim commanded Adam, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of technology. That the King James Version Bible used the word knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge just represents information or scientific knowledge. And if you look up the definition of technology, it's just scientific knowledge. And scientific knowledge can be used for good and it can be used for evil. And we go over this in detail in this study. But it says, ye shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die. So basically what we have here is the first lie, because he completely contradicts what Elohim has told to Adam. Now, there's a few things I want to cover really quick. If you go to Genesis chapter 5, verse 5, it says, and all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So basically, I'm explaining so you understand that Elohim did not lie. When he told Adam, in that day ye shall surely die. Some people, when they read Genesis chapter 5, verse 5, they go, well, he didn't die that day. He still lived 930 years before he died. And I'm about to explain that to you really quick. Again, this is just information from previous studies that I'm going over. Most people, when they read about when Elohim told Adam, in that day you shall surely die, they're counting the days and nights from the sun's perspective, from the solar system, as the earth rotates around the sun. This is not the day and night or the day that Elohim was talking about when he told Adam he shall surely die. He was referring to the day or the light that comes from the galaxy. These days is 1,000 years day, 1,000 years night. So if the fall took place in the 8th age, which was 16,000 years, when he told him, in that day he shall die, he's talking about within that 1,000 years he's going to die, not a 24-hour period. It's talking about the day from the constellations. There's two different times that our galaxy go by. It go by the rotation around the sun, and it goes by the constellation spinning and how long it takes for the Earth to pass through each galaxy. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, we're going to read verses 14 and verse 3. It says, and Elohim said, let there be a solar system in the atmosphere of the sky to divide the day from the night. So that solar system is referring to what is in the middle of the galaxy, and it is to divide the day from the night. This is the second day and the second night. When you go back up to verse 3, on the first day, it says, and Elohim said, let there be a galaxy. And the galaxy appeared. And Elohim saw the galaxy, that it was good. And Elohim divided the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day. This is the first day. And the darkness he called night. These days and nights are different times. These refer to years. These refer to ages. So again, when Elohim told him, in that day ye shall surely die, he's talking about within 1,000 years. And when you go back up, as you can see, after Adam sinned, he died within that next 1,000 years, within that next day. Now the scripture, when you go to 2 Peter 3 and 8, it says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So basically, this next image I have is just to show you, again, after the fall, this is the age of the Taurus. This is a 2,000-year period. The first 1,000 years represents day. The second 1,000 years represents night. And again, this dotted line kind of represents Adam died 950 years. That was within that 1,000 years, within that day that he ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So now we're back at verse 4. It says, and the cash said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. And again, when you go to Genesis chapter, and I have this read because it's a blatant lie. When you go to Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, and again it says, and Jehovah Elohim commanded Adam, saying, of the trees of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of technology of good and evil you may not eat of it, for in the day that you eat thereof you shall surely die. So again, verse 4, Satan completely lied. When you go to John chapter 8, verses 44, it reads, You are of your father Diablos, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speak a lie, he speak of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. In other words, Satan, the reason he's the father of lies, because he was the first one to lie. Lying and deception did not come from the tree of good and evil. The ability to lie and deceive come from Satan. This is something that man learned from Satan and not necessarily of the tree of technology of good and evil. The tree of technology of good and evil is how we have technology and scientific knowledge in the world today. Deception comes from Satan. Verse 5 says, For Elohim do know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your understanding shall be open. Now you go to Genesis chapter 3 verse 5 in the King James Version Bible. As you can see, it says your eye shall be open. If you look up this, the Hebrew reference number 5869, that this word eyes is translated from, and as you can see, I have that pulled up for you here already. And again, that's Hebrew reference number 5869. That word eye is translated from the Hebrew word iron. Now there's something I want to show you about this Hebrew word iron. If you look up research the Hebrew alphabet, and again this Aleph, Bet, Camel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, and so on, as you get to this letter here, as you can see, this letter is called iron. And you spell it just like this word iron. This is the word iron. This very first letter of this word is iron. This letter is iron, but this word is also spelled iron. Now, when you actually don't even have it here, but when you translate this later Hebrew letter iron back to the ancient Hebrew alphabet, the hieroglyph is actually an eye. And so this is why the scriptures read, and his iron or eye shall be open. But the eye is not referring to the natural eye. It is referring to the spiritual eye, which is the brain, and referring to understanding something with the brain. And I'm going to prove that here. When you go to Matthew chapter 13, we're going to read verses 13 to 15. It says, they seeing, see not. So they have eyes to see. Their natural eyes work, but their brain don't work right. And hearing, they hear not. Neither do they understand. When you go to verse 15, it says, for these people's brain. The King James Version Bible says heart is waxed gross, but the heart is referring to the brain, and waxed gross means it's made fat or lazy. So these people brains is lazy. Their brains don't work right. Their brains can't think right. Their brains too consumed with fun and entertainment. These people brains is lazy, and their ears are dull of hearing. In other words, their ears don't work right because their brain don't work right, and their eyes they have closed. So when you go back to the beginning, when it say their eyes was opened to knowledge, this scientific knowledge, now that man's eyes is open, now man close their eyes. They don't want to know the truth. They close it. Brains lazy. They don't study. They don't seek the truth. It says, at least at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should what? Understand. The eye is in reference to understanding something with their brain, and should be converted. And that's talking about being converted to the truth, and I should heal them. So again, we're back at verse 5. It says, for Elohim do understand that in the day you eat thereof, then your understanding or your brain shall be opened, and ye shall be as Elohim, understanding good and evil. Now, another thing I just want to confirm this with, when you go to that Genesis chapter 3 verse 5 on Blue Letter Bible, and you open up your Strong's reference numbers, as you can see, the word knowing come from the Hebrew reference number 3054. And I have a few verses here to show you that this word is also, instead of being translated as know, is translated as understanding. And I have 3 verses here to show you that. And in First Chronicles 12 and 32, they actually have understanding and knowing here in the same verse. But as you can see, they are translated from the same Hebrew reference number 3045. But again, when you go back up and you put the word understanding, it just makes it a little more clearer for modern readers. Now, when you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 22, and again, and Jehovah Elohim said, behold, the man is become as one of us to understand good and evil. Now, the reason I have verse 22 here, because when you go back up to verse 5, when it says, in the day you eat thereof, then your understanding or your brain shall be open, and ye shall be as Elohim, understanding good and evil. Satan did not lie when he said this, because Elohim says the same thing in Genesis 3 and 22. And Jehovah Elohim said, behold, the man is become as one of us to understand good and evil. Now, this understanding good and evil, again, is referring to scientific knowledge. Once you have scientific knowledge, you can use this knowledge for good, or you can use this knowledge for evil. And as you can see, mankind, with all of their scientific advances, they have decided to use this knowledge for evil. With all the technology they have in the world today, there should be no hunger, there should be no homeless people. They could solve all type of problems with scientific knowledge, but instead of using this scientific knowledge for good, man has decided to use it for evil. Now, this next thing I want to demonstrate here for you, again, is to help you understand Satan's craftiness. If you remember, Satan started off with a question to elicit you for information and to get you to doubt the truth. Then he told a lie, and then he covered it all with the truth. And this is the same thing Satan does to this very way. He will get you to doubt. He'll teach you lies, and then mix it with the truth. Try to paint a pretty picture over it to get you to accept pretty much his whole plan, his whole craftiness. So don't fall for this. It don't matter how much truth it is. If it's mixed with lies and doubt, it's no good. You got to get rid of the doubt. You got to get rid of the lies and stick with the truth. The scriptures say a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump, or a little yeast will cause an entire dough of bread to rise when you cook it. We have verse 6. It says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. Now, when most people read this, they have a doctrine that they teach Adam was deceived too, and he was right there with Eve when she ate of the fruit, and this is not true. When you go to Genesis chapter 2 verses 8, it says, and Jehovah Elohim planted a garden eastward of Eden, and there he put Adam whom he had pottered. So when you go back to verse 6, when it says, and gave also unto her husband that was with her, this is not saying he was right there while she was deceived. They was just in Eden together. Eden is a large garden. And then when you go to 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 14, it says, and Adam was not deceived. So he was not there with the woman when she was deceived. but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Verse 7 says, and the brains of them both were open, and they understood that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves tie leaf skirts. Now the King James Version Bible just say made aprons, but I use tie leaf skirts so people can understand that they just didn't basically cover themselves with leaves, but they invented clothing. And this is how you know that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is referring to technology, because one of the first things they did after their eyes was open and they knew that they was naked, they can understand that they was naked, they invented something, and they invented the first clothing. Because the tree of knowledge is the tree of technology. Technology is scientific knowledge. Their minds was open where they can begin to understand scientific knowledge, and that's just a deep understanding of the things that Elohim created. And with that information, you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. Again, 1 Timothy 2:14, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. We have verse 8, and they heard the voices of Jehovah Elohim walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Jehovah Elohim amongst the trees of the garden. And Jehovah Elohim called unto Adam and said unto him, where are you? And he said, I heard you talking in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, who told you that you was naked? Have you eaten of the tree, whereof I commanded you that you should not eat? And the man said, the woman whom you gave me to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. So Adam not claiming he was deceived. Adam kind of blatantly disobeyed God. He was not deceived. There's a big difference between being deceived and blatantly disobeying God. So the question here is, why did Adam blatantly disobey God? And we're going to go over a few scriptures to hopefully help you understand that. First scripture we're going to go over is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 through 4. It says, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughters ye shall not give unto his sons, nor your daughters shall ye take unto your sons. For they will turn away your sons from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of Jehovah be kindled against you and destroy you suddenly. So here when you read Deuteronomy 7, 3 and 4, Elohim specifically warns the nation of Israel that do not marry women outside of Israel, because women can turn men from God. And this is kind of the same thing we see what happened with Kava and Adam. Kava kind of turned Adam from God because she was deceived by Satan. Now to give you another example, when you go to 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 1 through 8, it says, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughters of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which Jehovah said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall ye come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your hearts from their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And his heart was not perfect with Jehovah his Elohim, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth is just talking about worshiping astrology, and that referring to December 25th, the winter solstice. The goddess of Ziddians, and after Malacham, the abominations of the Ammonites, and Solomon did evil in the sight of Jehovah, and went not fully after Jehovah, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abominations of Moab, in the hills that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burns incense and sacrifice unto their gods. So again, the question is, why did Adam blatantly disobey Elohim? Because he clave and was in love with his woman. And that is the most simplest answer as can be. He loved Eve. And because he loved Eve, Eve turned his heart from obeying Elohim. Verse 13 says, And Jehovah Elohim said unto the woman, What is this that you have done? And the woman said, Nakash, that is that serpent, Nakash deceived me, and I did eat. So again, the woman was deceived and not the man. Now, got one last question I want to answer before I end this lesson, and that is answer the question of why did Satan do this to Adam and Chava, or to most people know as Adam and Eve? Why did he do this? What was his motive behind doing this? And I'm going to try to explain this to you the best I can. Now remember, Satan is called Nakash in the beginning. When you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 13, when it says, And Jehovah Elohim said unto the woman, What is this that you have done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me. So you have to remember, Chava just referred to Satan as Nakash, because this is the word she used. She said, Nakash deceived me, and I did eat. So again, we're going back to what is that Nakash. When you go back to that Hebrew reference number 5175, this is that Hebrew word Nakash that Eve called Satan in the beginning. She called Satan Nakash. Now, again, that comes from Hebrew reference number 5175. When you go to Job 26 and 13, it says, By the spirit, or by the breath of Elohim, he hath decorated the heavens, and that's with the constellations. His hand hath formed the crooked Nakash. That's that constellation serpent. So, again, the reason he's called Nakash is because the constellation Nakash represents him. So now we're going to go back and look at that constellation Nakash. This is that constellation Nakash. This is the name of the constellation. This is also the name of Satan in the beginning. Now I want to talk about this constellation Virgo here. And when I talk about this, we're going to use scripture. It says, and this is Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 through 10. This is Joseph. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun, there's the sun, there's the sun, and the moon, there's the moon, and again, this is an alignment that happened September 23rd, 2017. And the 11 stars, there's 11 stars in the constellation Virgo. I mean, there's 12 stars, but one of the stars represents Joseph. And it says, And the 11 stars bowed down to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, And his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I? So in other words, when he says the son represents um, Jacob or Israel. And thy mother, that's the moon. And thy brethren, his brother is referring to the 12 tribes of Israel, the other 11 tribes. So this constellation Virgo represents the nation of Israel. It represents the nation of Israel and their father and their mother. It says, Indeed, come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth. So, again, this is the constellation Nakash, which represents Satan. This is the constellation Virgo, which represents the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, from here, I want to go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 3. It says, And Elohim said, Let there be a galaxy. And there was a galaxy. And we go over this in the study the first day when he created light, when we go over Genesis 1 and 3. Now, again, a galaxy is a system of millions of billions of stars together as gases and dust held together by gravitational attraction. So, on the first day, before Elohim ever created, before man existed, before the earth was finished, before the heavens was even finished, the first thing he does was create the galaxies. Now we go to Amos again, chapter 9, verse 6. It says, It is he that established his stories in the heavens. When did he establish these stories in the heavens? On the very first day. This is before man ever existed. So now we're finna go back to this, that Elohim created on the first day. And this is why Nakash did what he did to Adam and Eve. As you can see, this is Nakash. So this, what happened, it is he that establishes stories in the heavens. Now we went over in the last lesson and the beginning of this lesson that Nakash was created before the heavens and the earth was ever created. He's from another galaxy, from another planet, and in the last lesson we go over just how beautiful he was. He was a cherubim, a beautiful cherubim. He was a what's the word we use? I forgot the word. But over that last lesson, we go over pictures of just how beautiful Satan was. Now, in the constellations, and this is what Nakash knew. As you can see, Nakash is under the foot of Israel. And in the beginning, Satan understood this. He understood that he was always subject and will be under the foot of Israel. Although he was created before and created with beauty and wisdom, that after God created man in his image, that this great cherubim dragon, is underneath the feet of Israel. And Nakash did not like this. He knew that he was created to worship Israel, because Israel is the bride of Christ, and they are made in the image of Elohim. Nakash, or the serpent, was not happy with this. And we're going to confirm this with some scriptures. When you go to Isaiah chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, it says, and this is talking about Nakash. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of Elohim. And that is still talking about the constellations. He wants to exalt his throne, which is represented by the constellation serpents and corona borealis. He wants to exalt them from under the feet of Israel and above Israel. He doesn't want to worship Israel. He wants Israel to worship him. It says, I will also sit upon the mountain of the congregation. Sit upon the mount, and this mountain is talking about the Temple Mount. It says, in the sides of the north, and the Temple Mount is north to the city of David. The temple that Solomon built was in the city of David, not on the Temple Mount. Verse 14 says, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, because Elohim always, even when he appeared to Moses, he appeared on a mount. Mountains are typically higher than the clouds. So this is Satan saying, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like Elyon, or the Most High. In other words, he wants Israel to worship him. He does not want to worship Israel. He feels like he's better. He's smarter because he's created first and he's from this everlasting planet. But yet he was created to worship Israel before Israel was ever created. When you go to John chapter 8 verses 44, it says, how you are of your father Diablos, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning. So what does it mean he was a murderer from the beginning? Because by him lying to Adam and Eve, or Adam and Kava, he pretty much caused their death. Anytime you lie to somebody to cause their death, you will be defined as a murderer. And this is what this is talking about. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speak a lie, he speak of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So the reason he deceived Eve or Kava, it was so that he can murder Adam and Kava. He did not want to worship them. He thought he was better than them, so his plan was to destroy them. And he tried to do it cunningly, as if they just ate from the tree out of their own will. Not that he deceived them, but they the ones who told God, the serpent deceived us. When you go to Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 16, it says, and again this is my version, it says, because the greatness of your beauty. I believe the King James version say, because the multitude of thy merchandise, and this is only referring to the greatness of his beauty, because his merchandise is all those stones, those colors that his skin is, the diamond and gold. And again, we talked about that in the last lesson. So it's basically just referring to the greatness of his beauty. It says, they have filled the midst of you with injustice. Because thought he was so beautiful, one of the most beautifulest creatures that God created. Again, a beautiful dragon, a beautiful cherubim that was beautiful and could sing. He did not think he should be under the foot of Israel, and it filled him with injustice, and he sinned. And how did he sin? By deceiving the woman into eating the forbidden fruit, and bringing about the death of Adam and Kava. And with this being said, this concludes this gospel.